My name is Christian Ramirez,
Yep, I'm Kevin Teman.
and we're just going to be talking about near-death experiences and other metaphysical and esoteric topics. All right, but yeah, near-death experiences.
Yeah.
What do you know about near-death experiences? Do you know much, or never asked you?
Yeah. I just know the basic concept that they've happened a few times that people will. I think it's mostly in the hospitals that I've heard of it, where somebody's dying and then
Mm-hmm.
somebody else goes through it with them.
Right.
They go through the tunnel and meet spirits, but somehow the person in the room or somebody, maybe they don't have to be in the room. I'm not sure, but they go through it with them, and then I don't know. They just remember certain elements of it. It's kind of all I got, and it's a valid thing.
Yeah.
There's several people have happened to.
So it
You
is.
know,
Yeah, it is rarer of a phenomenon, but it does happen. And apparently, just to like explain it out, I guess, is a shared death experience is when someone else is dying and a person in the room or within the vicinity of that person goes partway through the death experience with that person. So they end up leaving the body, seeing beings, seeing deceased loved ones. They go through a portion of that with them. And what's interesting is that it doesn't always have to happen, I guess, in a hospital setting. I did speak with one person personally who used to be an EMT, and she was telling me this, and it was funny because it was a client. They sort of liked me, so they started to open up and talk about the doctor. She actually had a near-death experience, and we're talking about this over a business call, so it was funny. And her colleague used to be an EMT, and she's like, "You guys didn't ask me about my experiences." And she talked about how when she was an EMT in the 80s, she was actually resuscitating someone back to life, and, or like trying to get them to breathe and start their heart up again. And while she was doing the resuscitation technique, she said she came out of her body through her back, and she could actually see herself still trying to resuscitate the person, and she didn't know what was going on. She was like, what is she didn't never heard of this. She didn't know what was happening. She could actually still see her try to resuscitate, and she's like, what's how am I still, if I'm here, how am I still there trying to resuscitate the person? She said I could still see myself having conversations with the people around and the firefighters and everyone else while still maintaining the awareness of back here and out of the body. So she knew after this experience that it was real, but during those times, she said, especially being a woman, she couldn't really, a lot of these people weren't very open either, so you couldn't really talk about it. And she said, plus,
well, so did she experience what the person that was dying went through?
no. So she never mentioned, I wanted to investigate further, but again, it was a business call. But she said, so it's kind of like a strapped for time kind of thing. She said that she was out of her body. She never mentioned seeing the other person or anything like that, but she was experiencing symptoms of like a type of near-death experience, like the out of body, the actually being able to leave the body, seeing around yourself. 360-degree vision is something that's often reported in near-death experiences. And it kind of taps into that whole time thing because of if everything's happening all at once and our true selves or our soul is able to experience many things outside of the human perspective simultaneously, it would go into explaining how she could have that experience while also herself, like in the body, is still having a conversation like this experience isn't even happening, if that makes sense. Which is weird because she said, I never fainted. Like I could see myself still working on the person, but she's like, how am I still having that interaction while my perspective and awareness is over here behind me? So, which is very interesting.
I don't even know how to imagine that.
Yeah, it's very hard to imagine that. It's like being at two places at once, which I believe personally
Exactly.
that the soul is multidimensional. And one thing I'll tap in on, and I'll let you take it away with your understanding and
And
perspective, is that one movie I recommend everyone watch this. It's on YouTube. It's actually called Life After Life. I Died, So Now What? And it's a very interesting documentary where the uh, the host, the guy who created the movie, goes to interview different mediums at different times, and he asks all of them the same questions about what happens after we die, what they think happens, what the soul is, energy, vibration, um, and even they even have Robert Schwartz. He's the author of Your Soul's Plan and Pre-Birth Planning. He's a hypnotist who worked with mediums to life regress people back into why they chose the life that they chose, talking about before coming into the physical body. And in the movies, it's interesting because all these mediums are answering and they're saying the same things about energy, vibration, reincarnation, that the soul is multidimensional. And the first medium that comes up is John Holland, big fan of his. And he says, I believe the soul is multidimensional. And he gives an example. He says, for instance, he was on a cruise, and at the time he wasn't as well known as a medium, and he was working with another famous medium at the time, and they took a husband and like a wife, and they were going to split them up. One was going to go with the more famous medium, one was going to go with him, John Holland. And what ended up happening at the same time was that the same soul that came through for both people at the same time. And they realized when they compared the information that it was happening simultaneously, and they were sharing the same information. So if you're a soul being not restricted by time and space, you could technically be visiting mom and visiting dad at the same time and handle that input, handle that information, because you're not restricted by physicality.
That seems kind of related to the viewpoint that Rupert Spira, for people that don't know, Rupert Spira, we could put his name up. It's Rupert. Such a great person, just such a joyous man. But anyway, he talks about how, in his viewpoint, which I think is a combination of many other viewpoints, but Rupert Spira comes up with all of his stuff by introspecting himself, going deep into himself.
Right.
That's the thing I like most about him, actually, is that he has come up with everything by self-exploration solely. That
A lot
on the
of people
basis
can
of
learn
that,
from that. Yeah.
right? On the basis that everything starts with awareness. That everything else is basically, made up. If we're saying that there's matter out there, physical matter, then we're just kind of making it up. We just perceive that there's matter, and so our awareness and our perceptions are the basic thing that we can trust.
Right.
And that's how Rupert comes to most of his things. But he says, he says that there's one consciousness, that it's infinite, that it's I don't know if all powerful is the right word, but it's infinite. It's only one of them, and it can it can be divided up and in all people at the same time, and,
Right.
and anybody else that gets it. And there's some kind of like how that works exactly. It's kind of like a separation of the consciousness, that there's a like I feel like I'm Kevin. It's separate, but we're all actually the same consciousness. It's similar to split personalities, and in a person, that they can have all these different personalities, and they can jump from one to the other, but they feel like they're one at a time. The feeling, the consciousness that's in everybody as a big thing, if it's in one person, it's just an illusion.
Right.
That it's just one person. So that's what he says, and that's just hard to grasp, but it makes sense. It fits with all the other things that you'll discover when you look at NDEs and mediums and how all this stuff works.
And also what you sent me with Deepak. That's his name, Deepak?
Deepak Chopra.
Yeah. And surprisingly, you brought that up to me, and my mom has brought him up to me after I started like waking her up. She started
Surprised you hadn't
listening
heard
to.
of
Yeah, I didn't, and I was like, it's crazy though. Like all these people were always around, and it's just like once you have that awareness, they start popping up everywhere.
Deepak Chopra was he's been saying this for a long time, and I don't think he even knows about NDEs.
Yeah.
or
But he's so on
what
point.
was really interesting. all these great thinkers don't know about NDEs, but they arrive at the same conclusions that NDEs show us also.
Right.
Rupert Spira does, Deepak Chopra does. He talks about the greater one consciousness divided up into people as well.
Right.
I think he follows that model almost exactly. But yeah, the exercise of one consciousness being divided up into many would explain how you could be in two different places at the same time, aware of two different things.
Right. And it goes on to explain like how, you know, souls, you know, how we were talking about NDEs and how souls could have in the last episode, how they can have conversations telepathically with, it could be 20 different beings all at once. And people break that down and they'll say that they're like, I'm having conversation with my deceased mom, dad, all this, and it was all happening all at once. And they can handle that input, that we're all source or God or whatever you wish to call it, experiencing itself through the illusion of separation for learning.
Yeah.
But we still maintain our individuality when we cross over, which is very interesting.
When you're saying like we could talk to many souls at the same time, then my mind goes to, and there's no time also.
Yeah.
So even the language that we used to describe that statement,
Yeah.
we said the word time in there, but there is no time.
Yeah.
So I'm back to, it's so hard to just imagine the feeling of no time.
Being in a dimension of time and space that utilizes.
If there's no time, then of course you can talk to many souls at the same time.
Yeah.
You're talking to every. In fact, I've heard many NDEs say that they're actually talking. Oh, what would you say?
No, say that last thing. I didn't say anything important. Go ahead.
Like, I think you said there's a barrier.
Oh, there is no barrier anymore. Physical reality barrier.
I watched the near-death experience last night where he said that he was talking to everybody at the same time, and that when he was talking to his spirit guides that he was talking to in the NDE, is as though this kind of scared me, is as though he was talking to every soul at the same time.
Yeah.
When he was talking to one person, every soul was listening.
Yep.
Which is actually frightening if you think about it. Can you imagine, people that have public fright?
Yeah, there is
You're saying something, and every single soul in the entire universe is listening to you at the same time.
What's interesting too is that they say that transparency allows for no lying or anything like that. You can't lie. It's like being naked. And Penny, the woman in the last episode we talked about, who giving it forward in her life review, when she was shown her giving $1 to someone or giving money, extra money to someone who didn't have it in line at the checkout station, she talked about when she sensed this being that she could only understand as God or source coming to her. She said it was like being naked in front of a man for the first time, because it was like you can't, you're kind of embarrassed and you're kind of like, oh God, I can't, this is it. This is what I look, this is what I am. You can't hide anything. And that's what it's like. And it is hard to wrap your mind around like telepathy and hands.
But to add to that, it would be trust, right, in that scenario.
Yes.
That because
there's no
in the human world, we don't trust everybody, and we shouldn't. There's a lot of people with bad intentions. In
that realm, there's love and understanding, and so it's not like you're just naked and there's nothing to support you, and you're just that transparent. It's more that there's awareness and love, and even though you still might be embarrassed, you get that unconditional love from the other beings that are there, like your deceased loved ones, like from Source itself, which is,
and no one trying to hurt you. Right?
Exactly, no one's trying to hurt you. Yeah,
pure love. Yeah. I hadn't heard the feeling naked thing. Yeah.
Oh, and one more thing to add. There was a guy who had a near-death experience who said he could see the entirety of the planet and the world. And he said, I could see into the life of everyone at that time. You could ask me any question about any person on the planet, and I could answer that. He's like, I don't know how to explain how I gained that knowledge and how I could process that information that quickly, but it was almost like the shackles of the human body were released. And Once you leave the body, apparently you awaken to your normal senses or who you truly are, and you have these heightened abilities and awareness. So it's pretty awesome.
I concur with all that, what you're saying. What do you think about the fact that when you're talking to one soul up there, when you're having an NDE, you're actually talking to every soul in the entire universe at the same time? I'm kind of struck by that. I don't know how to digest that,
I think it's
interpret that. And
I think it's hard too because our brains and how our bodies work can't completely comprehend that because you try to, and it's just hard. You can't, because it's the same thing when you try to imagine infinite. How do you imagine infinite if infinite
yeah,
seems to be coming back from all this research talking about how the universe is infinite, it's ever expanding, and we're all a part of that. And you're eternal, meaning infinite. You're an infinite, eternal spiritual being having an experience in a physical body.
which it does feel that way.
Yeah.
Like when you really look inside, it feels that you're infinite. It feels like you're all powerful.
Yeah.
I've always said it feels like I will live forever, and it feels like I'm also the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Both of those things.
And
And so
each of us live
those are
in
kind
our own little universes, if you think about it. There's a channeler I listen to, Daryl Anka. He channels a being called Bashar. It just means messenger. That's it in Arabic. And he talks about how we're all creating our own little universes. And whenever, like, if you and me were in the same room, you are the version that I am perceiving, and I am the version that you are perceiving. So we each have our own little individuality, little reality bubbles going on. And it's kind of interesting because it's like once we get off the podcast, you're going off to do your thing, and it's still happening, even though I can't perceive it. You know, when you go to make dinner and you're by yourself in your house, that's still happening, even though I can't perceive it. We have that illusion of separation. And he talks about how our hearts, our physical hearts, actually emit this field, electromagnetic field, that connects all of us together. They actually give off an energy sequence to the people and things around us. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, when you talk about people, like someone just walks into a room and you ever notice, I don't know if you ever noticed that when someone walks into a room and they just light up, they light up the room, everyone else, their energy just changes for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm starting to think about, Christian, when I first learned about NDEs, I was so happy because, like I said in our last podcast, it's really great news for humanity.
Yeah, isn't that awesome?
Wonder and yeah, and
Isn't
then
that doom
have
and gloom?
and feel yeah, and not have to fear the blackness of what we were taught was death.
Yeah.
And but I'm now starting to become more critical and thinking about the things that I should be thinking about. And I'm trying not to be negative to myself about it. Because actually NDErs all say, don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
This world is really difficult or whatever. And they all say when they come out, don't be hard on yourself. Don't be hard on other people. Like forgive them. And somebody was saying, I watched one last night and they were saying that even with the world condition and capitalism and the horrible greed and things like that, that we still shouldn't be. It might have been something you sent me. We still shouldn't be hard on ourselves. We should actually forgive ourselves.
Yes.
We should look at everybody else and forgive them.
Yeah.
And then and that's really powerful by itself. I was thinking about now when I text people, like people that I'm dating, girls that
Right.
I'm dating, or anybody that I'm texting, I'm thinking about, when you you're making a text and there's so much emotion
Yeah.
in you,
Yeah.
but you keep making the text over and over, just trying to make it perfect,
Right.
a perfect reflection of how you feel. But while you're constructing it, you've made so much emotion around the subject
Right.
that the can't possibly encompass all the emotion that you've put into it.
Yeah. It frustrates me because sometimes you want them to really encompass and understand what you're trying to convey.
Yeah. And now that I'm enlightened by what happens during NDEs, I'm looking at that situation in terms of all the mental energy, all the energy that I'm actually putting out,
Yeah.
that some people say, that they could receive it. And I still don't know how they're receiving it. It's not like they're like, boom, I got a message. He says, let's go out tomorrow at 7:00.
Yeah.
Dating now. It's not like they like get it that specific, but they could get your energy when you're making that text. Is that true in your mind from all this research that you've
Yeah.
done as well?
Energy is a thing, and I also believe in telepathy, and it, especially when we're talking about text. Isn't it funny that text, you won't always come across as clear, but at the same time, you'll notice that sometimes you can text something and someone will get an energetic response from it, even though if you look at a text, it's almost fundamentally neutral, yet someone is able to interpret it energetically, like, why do you say it like that? You know what I mean? Like, they can read and they can feel it. It's just a weird thing. And sometimes you may not have intentionally meant it to be a certain way. So you have to like re-explain yourself, which is
I got to retrain myself. Every time I get a text, it's just stress.
yeah, that's what
I
I
don't care
mean.
who texted me or what time. I'm like, oh God, there's a text. I have to deal with this.
Yeah,
Because I always know that the text is like out of context and
yeah, that's why I
doesn't
like
have
voice
proper.
messaging. I do that. Like, I'm guilty of it. I'm like, quick voice message, because then you can like hear. You can also kind of get emotional response from the voice and stuff.
My major point actually is that I'm a very analytical guy,
Yeah,
and I know a lot of other people are analytical, especially technical people, and they analyze what they're saying in the words that come out exactly, and when they send emails or texts,
right.
and it's so important. And we believed growing up that that is the only thing that they will get, that they won't feel your emotions and all that stuff.
Yeah,
So you have to make the text perfectly clear if you're intelligent. Make it perfectly clear so you convey as much communication as possible, because communication is key.
right.
But that doesn't account for the fact that your emotions and everything you're thinking while you're generating that text is also going into the picture. It's a mindset change. For me, I stumble a bit at that because I think I've messed up in most of my communications, because for me, it's all about the final text. And the
Right.
process of getting there is like, sometimes it's very painful. Like I said, when I get text, I'm like, oh God, then I turn over it and I try to make the perfect text with the perfect communication. But I think that that's maybe the wrong approach. I think that if you just spend a little time and feel good while you're making it, even if it's not perfect, even if your text is like 3 words, like those texters that say like, sounds good,
Right.
and there's no detail in their text at all.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better approach if they're feeling good while they're texting it and not going into that stressful place.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Like,
saying?
yeah,
Law of
because
attraction.
yeah, because law of attraction is a very big thing, especially on what you're feeling. What you feel and emanate is what you attract towards yourself vibrationally. And I've heard people talk about it being, oh, that's woo woo, oh, that's, but when you come from it, if you want to say scientifically, everything is made up of vibration. Nothing is truly solid. Everything vibrates at a certain resonance, even your thoughts. And that's what near death experiencers talk about. So it's just like what you are embodying and feeling, you start to draw in towards yourself. So I try to be conscientious of my thoughts, feelings as much as possible. I'm not perfect, you know what I mean? I have my off days. But
When you're saying that about vibrations, I just want a slight detour. That
sure.
maybe movement itself is life. In Asia, they had a saying that movement is life,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I often thought, I was thinking about that a couple nights ago, and it came to me kind of like a revelation: is that everything is vibration, and and I've started discovering, even just to do things more efficiently around the house, I have to like kind of vibrate.
Oh
That when
my
I'm
God.
picking up something, vibrate it to get it off the damn table because it's sticking to the table. And there's just a lot of it, and it's actually the nature of iteration in the universe, that it kind of goes over and over again.
Right.
There's an iteration thing that seems fundamental as well, but vibration itself, that is being the definite movement itself, being the very
Yes.
fundamental.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a book I read called Presence, Kindness, and Freedom by, I believe her name is Barbara Brodsky. She went deaf after giving childbirth, I believe, and she was very depressed. And all of a sudden, she saw a being standing in her kitchen, and she had this interaction. And then eventually, the being and her got to know each other, and she started channeling information. And the being's name is Aaron, and he's spiritual, so he's a light being, where he explains that we're all light beings, but he is only light because he's not in a physical body, so what we're all made up of. And he talks about the nature of the universe, and he says the one thing that is very constant in the universe is change, and we have to learn how to change and go with the flow of things, because there's two emanating vibrations, which everything else arches from. You have fear, and then you have love. So love, everything that deviates from that, like joy, happiness. Then you have fear, hate, anger, and all of those emotions. And he says that fear grasps while love releases. So like whenever people who are afraid to change, so trying to go back to what you're talking about, how there's this just change in the universe. So when people are afraid of change, they get stuck, and they're usually in this rut, or they're in this cycle, for example, where they can't get out of the situations that they're currently in. Sorry about my cats. And you can
Spirit.
you could see them in the blur. But
Kitty spirit.
yeah. But change. You get stuck in this rut, and when you start doing something different, and you start embodying the change that happens and comes into your life, and you start going with the flow of those things, you start to notice change. But when you start going into the predictable, doing the same thing you wake up, do the same thing, you answer the same texts, you talk to the same people, you don't go out, you don't do all these other things, you're stifling yourself. You get stuck into this like muddy water where nothing else happens for you. Yeah. And that's what you start to emanate. And as you embrace change and you start being different, you start evolving, learning, kind of like what you were telling me in the last episode, how you've always been focused on like bettering yourself, and seeing what you could do next, and what evolves from that is amazing. So change is very important.
Yeah.
And it's a constant.
And I was just trying to like define. Yeah, change and the movement thing. There's something deeper about that to me, that I was just proposing that movement could be a fundamental essence of all life.
Right.
That if we're saying that spirituality and a lot of that is vibrations, how things exist at different vibrations, then it could be that just the movement itself, like why did something move in the first place?
Yeah. Materialist scientists have trouble understanding that. We're made up of like 99.999 space. Like it's just, nothing is truly solid. It's crazy.
Materialist scientists are unfortunately going down a flaming ship right now.
Because it's just like they say this is how the universe is, and then boom, they hit a wall, and then there are no answers for any of the other extra stuff. They don't have answers. But then when you start going into quantum physics, vibration, energy, they start finding answers like, oh, wait, this explains this and this explains that. And oh, that makes sense now. And you start evolving, and they're kind of, materialist science is kind of like what we were just talking about. We can bring it back to, they're not changing. They're not giving themselves room for change. And so they're stifling themselves.
Yeah. But, they've explained like one layer of reality fairly well, the physical world.
Yeah.
That is the physical world. That, maybe one day, not too long from now, we won't call that a physical world anymore.
Yeah.
If we all come to understand that it's actually mental, perhaps underneath. There's theories of that, and they seem valid. But we call it a physical world. It's pretty obvious why we call it a physical world, because the objects are so They seem physical. They seem so consistent. You can
Right.
touch them and they can be observed. It feels like a shared place. We are sharing this place. Science has evolved as a way to manipulate the shared world
Right.
that we all live in, to make computers, to do things that's all on the physical stuff that's there. We combine and meld it together. And do you think everything has a soul? Because I can't imagine that and go there. And by the way, a lot of this stuff does blow my mind.
You want me to
I
go
let my
there?
mind. Well, I'm asking because like we make computers by crunching up stuff. We crunch up all this physical stuff and put it into a new form.
I can answer
Like,
that.
what are souls going through if they're just constantly being crunched?
I can answer that question to varying degrees. It's gonna be far out there, but I guess
Well,
it's what
let's
I
see if I
found.
believe it.
Okay.
Convince me.
So what I've come to understand through near-death experiences, hypnotherapy, and I'm talking about the study and research into hypnotherapy, so other people who get regressed, even people who get abducted by aliens, who claim to be abducted by aliens, and they go through their regression to kind of remember what happened and their interaction with these beings. Um, they are all saying the same things, and they talk about how everything is alive, especially that these beings have the understanding that everything is alive, everything is conscious, even a rock, because everything comes from this source. It's not just our souls, everything is made up of that source.
I've
Love.
heard that in
Yeah,
NDEs too. Just to be clear, I want to validate that actually for a second,
sure.
just because honestly, it seems like I've heard that so many times from NDEs who are in that more mature state when they come back. They've said that everything, including rocks and trees and everything, come from the source, and
Right.
so everything is alive. I've heard that many times, so I do believe you, and I
Yeah.
think that that's real.
It
But I
becomes
don't
more
understand
apparent.
how that.
It
How do you
becomes
think that?
it becomes more
Is
apparent in the spiritual reality, because in that dimension you're now you have the shackles removed, you remember who you really are, and if you don't remember, from the NDEers who like come back, they explain that it is explained to them. And a lot of times you'll hear NDEers talk about how they'll have a question, and the moment they even ask, they're given the awareness of the knowledge of the question, so they have that understanding instantly as soon as they
I
ask the
think the
question.
fundamental I think the fundamental question here is, when you say everything is alive, including a rock, are you saying that a rock is a material thing and it is alive? Or are you saying that a rock is mentation? It is just an imagination from a mind, or is created by a mind.
It's weird because it's kind of like both, as I understand it. I'm only explaining it as I understand it. So it's like all of this is mental, but at the same time, because we live in a conscious universe, but at the same time, it is alive, because if consciousness is creating that thing, it therefore, by that definition, is also alive. Just because we don't understand it and we can't put, what do you call that? That's a stethoscope. I don't know how to say that, but that's a stethoscope or whatever that doctors use. It doesn't have a heartbeat. It doesn't have lungs. It doesn't breathe air. Doesn't mean necessarily that it's not alive. It's also composed of energy, vibrating, energy oscillating around itself to create what we call and perceive as a rock. But it takes energy to exist, and it is alive. And another thing, I won't delve, we don't have to talk about it too much, but a lot of whistleblowers who talk about, who like Emery Smith, who talk about having worked on like ET craft and stuff like that, all have this understanding that these craft are basically alive. They have this technology, AI, whatever you want to call it, that is alive. It has an awareness, or a soul, if you will, that combines with the occupant, and they can therefore think, and it can do whatever they want. But that's an entirely another topic.
Heard
But it,
that from Bob Lazar. Yeah, and it sort of seemed valid when I was
yeah,
hearing him.
and he's
He's
not the
convinced.
only one, which is blowing my mind right now. But yeah, even
Many
abductees.
people have reported that.
Yeah, and it's just
Of
interesting because
how many people in your age? when you've looked into it?
I've
Have
lost count. There's just so many abductees. I can't remember everybody's names, but I can point you in the right direction. If you look up Dolores Cannon, she actually does, uh, she has some books on past life regression. I'm reading one book now called Convoluted Universe, where she takes a lot of the stuff she didn't understand at the time, because a lot of the abductees were sharing information, sometimes going into a trance-like state where the beings themselves would talk through the person while she's has them like hypnotized, and they were giving answers to her questions. And at the time she couldn't understand it. She had to kind of do her own research on energy and vibration to start to comprehend the information that was coming through. Now, for me, with that awareness already, I understood a lot of what she was talking about based on near-death experiences and all the other stuff that I've come to understand. So it made sense. And that's why she started writing these books called Convoluted Universe, for people who had more of that awareness, or even for scientists who could put that together about how everything is happening all at once. Same thing, that the craft are alive, that the universe is conscious, that we don't actually die. Everything is energy. And they talk about many other topics as well. Crystals, that we're going to start to understand that crystals can hold energy and frequency, information, kind of like a USB stick, like we're going to start coming into that understanding again as we start looking at our past history, and it gets into other weird stuff. But yeah.
I still have the same question of, I still have the same confusion and the question of, if everything is live, what does it mean when we like make a USB stick, for example, and we squish parts together and we remold them? And are all those things dying and getting
No,
I mean, are all those things coming in and out of existence as we're squishing them and stuff?
I don't think so. I think that everything that is, which is everything that we perceive, is alive, even if we change its form. Because remember, law of conservation, energy can't be created or destroyed. It goes right back to that. It just changes forms. So even a USB stick that's made of metal, that was put through a process and everything, is still alive. It's just changed its form. It's just a different form of
When you
energy.
say alive, do you mean that it has a consciousness?
A consciousness, yes, but not as we understand it. Obviously, like if you look at a cat or a dog, you know it's alive and conscious, but it's obviously probably a different awareness level than what we have. But they still have personalities. They still have, I don't think rocks perceive themselves as like, oh, I'm a rock named Ted, and and they go by a name or anything like that. But they're alive in the sense that they are made up of energy and come from the source, or that energetic makeup that makes up all things, if that makes more sense.
It does, and I got to add to that, because maybe I'm making some headway in this, because I've been confused about this. Is called panpsychism as well.
I've never heard of
that.
that.
Everything has. Oh yeah, panpsychism.
Oh,
This
there's a
is.
word for it, of course. Nice.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I was a panpsychist before I learned about NDEs and realized a greater level of truth. But panpsychism just says that all things have consciousness, including rocks.
Yeah.
And it's feasible. But here's the thing: most people argue back to panpsychism, and the clear argument is clear, obvious. It's like the rock doesn't seem like it has a consciousness. It's we can tell. I look at a dog, and it looks pretty conscious compared to a rock. But I would argue right now that the dog has a different level of consciousness than the human, like you were just saying.
Yes. It's just a different level of awareness, different consciousness level.
Like 70% as much as a human has,
Mm-hmm.
and the rock could be only 1% of what the dog has. And further, looking at near death experiences, when humans leave their body and go back up to the source, maybe the rock is actually living in that out of body kind of experience, maybe all the time. Maybe
that's an interesting way to look at it. And we only become aware once we leave the body, because people talk about everything being alive in a near-death experience, everything, and they feel it.
And that leads to the next question, which is, at what level of awareness does a soul become a soul, a separate soul? That a human has a separate soul, and it stays separate. From what I've seen with NDEs, it stays separate for a long, long time. I don't know how long, maybe forever.
Yeah.
But does a rock have a separate soul? And if it doesn't, then when does a separate soul get put into something? Because I would say that a soul was put into a dog clearly, but not put into the rock.
So, as I understand it, anything that has a soul, by your definition, is eternal. So, what that means is there was no beginning
Right.
to you, you always were. Now, when
I
we
agree with
talk
that
about
too.
if you always were and there's different levels of awareness, how does that come in? Like when they talk about old souls, young souls, which is just really an illusion, but it's just a way for humans to kind of understand. So, as I understand it, a soul who would be considered an old soul has the awareness of more empathy, compassion, more unity consciousness, whereas a younger soul who has less experience in physicality, because reality and the universe is just forever. So apparently, there's so many different experiences we can have, and in their level of development, that being just has a different level of awareness. They're not at that level of empathy, compassion, and that's why they would call that a young soul, or like the people who run the country. Why we have this corruption going on. They don't have that understanding. But they too are a part of Source, like everything else is. And it's interesting that you brought that up about the rock. And when does a soul get put into a soul? Because in Kindness, Presence, and Freedom, Aaron, the being, goes into explaining how uh, Source likes to experience itself as everything. So, even a rock, what's the purpose of a rock? By experiencing itself as a rock. That's its purpose. It wants to be experienced as a rock. And he talks about the stages of development that happen as a soul progresses through awareness by experiencing things to come to greater and greater and greater levels of awareness. So eventually going to that part where you will eventually like meld with the one. So the one at the top, or what you want to call God or Source or whatever you want to call it.
I still have an error in my head.
Sure.
It doesn't seem like the rock is experiencing something. And it seems like my soul, which I know from near-death experiences, is a little bit deeper than Kevin, my human form that I'm in this world. But I also know that it has a lot of my memories and personality and a lot of things that make me me, my drives and all that stuff. It continues after because people in NDEs say that they have that while they're in that other place. It seems like it continues outside of the human. That whole everything that soul is, like, how would we ever decide to go into a rock? And if we did, wouldn't that just be like an incredibly boring existence for
Well,
somebody that's just come from human?
Well, the thing is, you have that. I think it goes forward, so it never really goes backward. So, it is just my theory. So, at our level of awareness, we can perceive that we really wouldn't enjoy that type of experience. Therefore, we wouldn't want to do it. Maybe we've already been at that level of experience before, and we can't remember it now. So, there's no need to go back to experience that. There are better things we can be doing with our time. And if you want to think about it this way, if everything is made up of energy and everything comes from the source or that energy and everything is alive, and we start to go into fractals here. I don't know if you saw that video I sent you last night with Greg Braden,
I haven't
but
watched it yet. I can't wait to watch it.
yeah, watch it, because he talks about how they're starting to understand scientifically that that Earth and this existence is more of a holographic reality. It's like a hologram. So when he likens it to the holograms back in like the 90s, remember those hologram like
Like, they're
bookmarks that,
amazing.
yeah, and it was like
Yeah.
3D. And he says if you were to get a true hologram, if you were to take one of these bookmarks and you would actually cut them and you would actually take a microscope and look into the tiniest portion of that hologram, you would see the same image of the totality of the picture that you were looking at to begin with in that hologram. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And our reality seems to replicate that makeup. So that's what it's looking like to them. So if you look at an atom and you look at the oscillating energy, the electrons and everything, these moving parts, we have all these moving parts, these energies moving. you actually look at our universe, you'll see that it's mimicking that. So now we have a sun with,
Mm.
all the planets rotating around, which kind of look like an atom, don't they? And it just keeps replicating. Then you zoom out of that and then you see a universe, and you start to see that the universe is a toroid making factory. A toroid is, it's also called the torus. It's that energy field that you see like cycling in and out. The Earth has a toroid field. The human body has a toroid energetic electromagnetic field around it. If you cut an apple or an orange, you can still see that toroidal makeup. You can see it in a whirlpool. And that's when you start tapping into also free energy devices that tap into that understanding.
Is that toroidal, whatever you call that energy field, is that also, does it also take the form of a fractal pattern, a mandel? Because that looks like the mandel fractal pattern. It looks like a toroid. I don't know if it's the same shape.
Well,
Have you heard
it
of
makes,
mandel?
yeah, I think it does actually, because when you look at the toroid, not the toroid, excuse me, when you look at the fractal patterns that like the spiraling,
Yeah.
it's weird because they've also showed toroidal energy kind of spinning, like it's just spinning. Not only that, when you look at the planets, you can actually, and you follow their cycle. There's something I'm going to tag you in where they actually show the planets moving around each other, and they put a line for as the rotations go around, and it's making this design that looks like a star as it goes around each other over time. And it's just like this
Wow.
intelligent design, not random at all. And you can actually see this in what do you call this? I think it's called somatics or chematics, when they actually vibrate sand on a plate. They put sand on a plate and they vibrate at certain frequencies, and they make these patterns and shapes that are what we would call sacred geometry, which is very interesting. But when we going back to what you were talking about fractals, it's like that spiral that just keeps going on, and in the smallest fractal you see the image of the entirety of the fractal that you were seeing to begin with, and it goes on and on and on and on forever. And that the world seems to be made up that way. I say the world, I just mean the universe, all that is, whatever you want to call that. But yeah,
It's fascinating.
it
Do you
is.
see that? Do you see that? I wonder, have you come to the conclusion yet of whether the bottom is mental or whether the bottom is physical? Physical.
Mental. I think it's consciousness, that consciousness that makes up everything and chooses to have certain types of experiences, whether physical or whatever, or even things we can't even conceive of. And one of the things that the mediums had mentioned in that movie, Life After Life, they mentioned that from their understanding, especially speaking, one soul who was talking to one medium said that I want you to tell all the people listening that the earth is like a grain of sand in the cosmos. It's like a grain of sand on the beach compared to all the places and worlds that there are to experience, many that we can conceive of and many that we cannot. And it goes on and on and on forever. And you get to experience all of that if you want to throughout your development as a being. But yeah, sorry, you were going to say something?
Experience all of that. You mean, what do you mean?
Wait, sorry, say that again?
The earth is a grain of sand, and when you go through your human life, you get to experience all of that. What does that mean?
So what
The
I mean
universe?
is that the earth is not the only place. So one of the channelers that I've talked to, or I didn't talk to, but I listened to, excuse me, Bashar, Daryl Enka, him, and I've also heard this from certain NDE experiencers, will say that the earth is not the only planet with life on it. So there's life elsewhere. There are beings elsewhere, and with many different forms, some that look like us, some that don't look like us, some that could be based off of smaller creatures that we have, like insects that are more like humanoid and bigger. And that's kind of scary to think about, but it's just like the soul experiencing itself in many different forms. So you get to reincarnate in another world, if you wish, on a different planet that isn't Earth, that has a different theme with different things that it wants to experience with those people, and so on and so on and so on and so on, until apparently there are beings that are not even physical anymore. They get to go into their own realities that aren't physical, and some that are quasi-physical.
We aren't physical in our true nature.
We're not
Right.
physical in our true nature, which is interesting, but at the same time, we're, as I understand it, and as they've shared this, the earth and this dimension is as dense as it gets. It's as like hard dense as it gets. So meaning we have all these rules and limitations to this reality, sort of like, you still have to get in your car to drive to work. You can't just think about being at work and then you're at work, which is more what the spiritual world is like, where you can imagine
Gotta ask
community.
you,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I gotta drill down into that because you said it's as dense as it gets. I want to know what that means because it would seem like there would be a lot less dense places and a lot more dense places. But I think you're right because I've seen a lot of NDEs where they describe when they come back that Earth feels really heavy and really
Yeah.
muddy and really dense. They use that word,
Yeah.
dense. And I understand what you're saying, where you could just think and be somewhere, and that's hundreds of NDs that I've watched. They can think and be somewhere, and they go places and they travel.
Yeah.
And this place is so dense, but how do you know it's the most dense? How would we know that?
That's a good question. I'm just sharing it as I understand it, like what they shared. So there could be a denser place. I have no idea, but the one thing I can think of when it comes to that is that we still, as our awareness level as it stands, we still abide by like the rules of like time, space, relativity, and all this other stuff. So we have all these like rules where we still have to abide by them, and we can't walk through walls, and that's also another meaning by being dense. So another thing I mean by dense is that vibrationally we are on a much lower vibrational frequency than where spirit is, because obviously we don't just see spirit everywhere. Only certain people seem to have that capability where they can actually see a spirit in a room or something like that. And everyone can get to that level. Everyone has that capability. Some people are more open to it than others. And I think some people are at certain levels where they can perceive that information. But
I had
as
to
we
at least
raise,
comment.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if interrupting each other is the best way because of the lag that we have,
Yeah.
but that's the way I talk normally in a conversation. I just like to just, feedback,
No,
just constant
we'll
feedback.
definitely have to do this in person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it would be much better in person, like twice as good, because we don't have to have these stalls in our just quick back and forth
Right.
building our thoughts. But I just had to say, you said before that it's so scary to think about physical life forms on a different planet. Not as crazy as it is to think about NDEs
Yeah,
and all
true.
the spirits that are out there. Like the spirits
Yeah.
are out there are on another plane than
Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah.
It's less crazy to think about aliens on a different planet than it is to what NDEs are telling us that all of our existence
Right.
is outside of that. Earth is a temporary place we come to, a vehicle.
Yeah.
That's wild. I mean, that's more wild. I'm not even going to be impressed at aliens anymore
No,
after that.
and the thing is about these aliens, abductees, and the people who talk with them, and people who channel ET beings and stuff like that. And I know it's for anyone listening. It's just like you kind of have to do the research. You can't just take our word for it or anything. If you don't do the research,
Yes.
it will sound like nonsense to you. You won't be able to comprehend anything we're talking about. But if you do the research, you start connecting all these dots because you're like, wait a minute, and you have that. But apparently, these beings have this the beings that are like more technologically advanced have this understanding already, and they're kind of like waiting for us to get to that maturity level. We can't even treat each other with kindness and compassion. Look at how we treat the planet. Look at how we treat each other. They're waiting for us to get to that maturity level. And there have been cases where people who are meditating peace, kindness, and love, and they don't even have to do that. Some people are just on a mountaintop camping with their family. They're in that vibration, that energy of love, and then these beings show up, and they have a contact, a peaceful contact, because they're waiting for us to do this. And they show this in many different movies, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where they cover this information that they have this understanding about. And the information they're sharing also is that the universe is conscious. We don't die. They're sharing the same information that near-death experiences are sharing, that everything is made up of energy, that the universe is teeming with life, and that we're not alone. And I won't get into this right now, but a lot of that information is being suppressed for a lot of different reasons.
It seems very likely that I want to re-echo what you said too, just for the sake of viewers as well, that when Christian and I are talking, we're already on the same level because we've shared with each other over weeks all of the stuff that we've already come to realize from a lot of research. And we're not just going with this stuff. We're not agreeing with each other just because
Yeah.
I'm not just, I'm not a far out person. I'm not crazy minded. I'm a very logical and grounded person. I'm a programmer, for the last 14 years, and I make technology things. So I'm very reasonable. I don't just swallow all this stuff because
Yeah.
I just feel like being, accepting anything. Not the case. I just have come to these realizations. So yeah.
No, I was gonna say it is cool though to talk with somebody like this because it's just you get it. Like you just even if I say something you may not have heard of, but like you can put all the pieces together and it'll make sense to you kind of thing. Like it's just awesome. It's like this domino effect kind of thing that happens.
Yeah, like I said, I don't get spooked when I hear about the concept of aliens now because I know that spirits live outside of the body from all the looking into I've done with near-death experiences. And I know that it makes perfect sense that we would have life on other planets. And it may not even be, I don't know if it's in this physical world that the universe that we're living in. I don't know. Because there is one thing that's odd about the near-death experience and then coming back into a physical world. This is one of the things we were going to try to mention last time, is that when you're leaving your body during death, it's a slow process. You get out of your body, you go into the room that you're in, you look at your body, you're like realizing that you're dying. For non-spiritual people, it's like a rude awakening. They're stunned. And then they're observing, and then they're starting to get sucked away. And there's a movement, traveling from that place that you died all the way up to a place where you're finally in the spiritual world. There's a slow transition, which is typically through a tunnel. But when you come back, it's sudden. I've noticed in basically every single case, right? That as soon as there's a decision, you have to make a decision whether you want to live or die. As soon as you decide to go back to the human body, you're jerked into the human body. You're suddenly there.
Yeah.
That's odd. That to me says that the slow transition out of the human body one way only is to get you comfortable, is to not shock you so much.
Right.
Because you remember, it's an illusion. When you're in a human life, you've got an illusion that you're a human, that you're separate from everybody else. That illusion has been created for a long time. And when you come out of that for the first time, you are still clinging to the illusion.
Right.
And a lot of people cling desperately to the illusion, and it's harder for them. But it's got to be a slow process coming out. But the going back in, it's just like you're just thrown back in your body. So it indicates that it's not like it takes time. Like there is no time. Just a reminder.
Time doesn't
It's not like it
exist.
takes time.
Clocks exist.
Right. Which is just mind-blowing by itself, to try to get people to follow us. That as soon as you say there's no time, they're just like, they can't imagine that. They're just like going with it
I'm
anyway.
going to send you something after this too. You're going to appreciate
But I'm just trying to say that there's no real reason for there to be a slow process to leave, except for that getting used to thing. And the fact that you go back in your human body in an instant, to me, means that there's no travel time. It's not like in the spiritual world to the physical world, it takes a while to get there.
No.
It's instant. The moment you decide, it's like boom, you're in your human body. So it must be that these spirits can exist in many different places throughout the entire universe. There's an instantaneous, right? And it could be that there's just many different types of universes that are on different frequencies.
Exactly.
And you can't see them. Even in our own universe, there are different frequencies you can't see.
There could be
Bats
planets.
are living.
There could be planets in our own solar system that we cannot see because they're vibrating at a higher dimensional frequency.
Absolutely, there's bats. I mean, I'm just saying a case that we've studied in science and that we've proven already is bats that fly around and see solar or whatever they see. Solar, right, or something. Infrared.
Yeah.
Is it infrared or sonar?
Sonar. Yeah. So it's like the sound waves like bounce off of objects and come back to them, and then they can like see.
And however you explain it, it really doesn't matter actually how you explain it. In retrospect, science is so good at explaining things after they happen. Like magical things will happen and blow your mind, and scientists will say, well, this is called this and this is called this, and they give themselves an excuse to not realize the magic of it.
Right.
It's just
It's still
totally
awesome.
baloney. The
Still
whole
awesome.
thing
Yeah.
is so magical and unbelievable. And bats living an entirely different life than humans live in the same area that we're living. So it definitely stands that there could be different planets, like you were just saying, that are just at a different frequency. We can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we're looking out and not seeing other life forms that look like us.
Look at the visible light spectrum. I'll put that up on the screen as well. Like, look at the visible light spectrum. The humans can only see like a sliver of the visible light spectrum, yet we have ultraviolet rays, we have other rays, we have infrared, we have night vision, that things that we can't see without special tools, yet it exists.
Is it perhaps the reason we haven't found aliens? You know, our search for aliens is actually the same reason, the same thing that's causing us to go on this bad path of believing materialist only. The material is the only thing that exists. The physical body and the brain is the only thing that exists, and consciousness is an illusion. It's like, while we're thinking that, there's no way we can encounter things that are living in the conscious world that are actually real aliens that are there. And we're aliens, by the way, reminder.
Yeah, technically, if we go to the moon. Yeah, if we go to the moon, or what if we happen to go out to another planet in another solar system and there's life on it? Now we're the aliens, you know? So it's just...
Well, yeah, but not only that, Christian, but just a simple fact of losing your blood flow and having a near-death experience puts you outside of Earth and you become an alien in a moment. We're aliens fundamentally.
Yeah.
We were born in a place that's not Earth, and then we were sent to Earth. That's
And really quick, just to touch up on evidence for people who are just getting into this topic, because this is a lot for some people.
Oh, yeah.
I highly recommend, especially with the UFO phenomenon, because they're popping up everywhere now. And I don't know if anybody else watches the news. I don't anymore, but apparently they've officially admitted that UFOs are real. They don't know what they are. They're outmaneuvering aircraft that we have. And not only that, if you watch the 2013, it's on my YouTube channel on Transcendence, wherever you're watching this, Transcendence, they actually have the citizen hearing that happened in 2013, where they go over, they have many different people, researchers and scientists from many different cultures, even some of our own servicemen, people who watched over our nuclear silos, talking about how these craft came in and shut down our nuclear missiles. And they were sworn in that if they said anything, it would be considered treasonous. But they all came out of the group all at once to share this information so that people would be aware of it and that they're lying, so that we could have a better understanding of everything else that's going on in consciousness. It ties into the UFO. Sorry?
Who is lying?
Oh, the governments, the corruption that's going on. A lot of it has to do with free energy technology. If we start asking questions, well, how are UFOs flying around? We'll start going into the, I guess they're not using gas, coal, and oil. We start looking into sequester technologies and those types of topics. But just to go back into, consciousness and more evidence, through the Freedom of Information Act, they actually released documents. The CIA released documents about the gateway experience and protocols and procedures that they would use for remote viewing. And they gathered information that goes into detail, talking about how they could retrieve information from someone who could go into a meditative state and leave their body, astral project, or remote view a certain area with accuracy, and that they were going to continue using it because it was accurate. So if the brain produces consciousness, how is it that a consciousness from a human is perceiving information about another location accurately? It doesn't make any sense, does it? But unless the brain doesn't actually produce consciousness, unless it's the vehicle or or like the receiver of consciousness from elsewhere, and they elaborate on that and they go into meditation, they explain that, hemisync, how that actually works, hemisync meditations, hypnotism, and how hypnotism actually works, and how they can go into the subconscious to talk to a person's higher self to gain information and remember and recall information such as past lives and so on and so forth. And I'll put that document up on the screen here. I'll even put a link for the document for everyone to read, so you can actually read the documents for yourself. But yeah, I just wanted to tap on that.
You said that.
Sorry, go ahead.
You said that aliens had shut down our nukes at one time.
Yes.
I wonder if
there's a whole documentary on it too.
It just made me wonder if that's the reason we haven't set off nukes yet, is because
they apparently interfering, because we've been it's kind of like kids with matches, you know. And I have a theory. This is my theory, and it was my theory before it was like somebody else said this, but apparently this is their theory as well. The people who experienced this firsthand, they were like, I think that when we detonate nuclear weapons, the explosion is so powerful that it could be affecting other dimensions, other places that we can't see. And that's why they're stepping in. They're like, kind of like, okay, let's take the matches away from the kids. And so it's just crazy, because it's not just happening in our country. There are reports of it happening in other countries as well, but no one is ever harmed. They never harm any of the people there. And it's happened more than once. So these craft would show up. You have Captain Robert Salas, who didn't believe in this stuff, and he had people calling him. He was the one in charge of the facility, and his men were calling him, telling him, hey, there's a craft, glowing red orb floating, outside of our, right outside the front gate. It's really low. It's freaking us out. It's really low. What do we do? And they didn't do anything. And the missiles started shutting down. And this happened on numerous occasions at numerous bases. Each time nobody's hurt. They don't hurt anybody. They just shut down the missiles. They can't detonate the missile anymore. So, and that's happened, but they won't cover this in the media. We start going into this whole thing about how the media is controlled if you follow the money. And it's a whole big thing that we could talk about later. I just don't want to, deviate too much, but, it gets out there, but the information is there. And they cover all of this at the hearing with 6 former congressmen and women. And by the end of the hearing, the 6 congressmen and women were convinced with the amount of evidence and documentation that was provided to them from within our country and from outside of our country with the other researchers. It's just a lot of information. It's a big hearing, over a week long. Each video is about 2 hours long, but I recommend you watch it even, Kevin, whenever you have time.
How do you watch the videos?
You can either watch it through my channel, Transcendence. I have a playlist called UFOs and Disclosure, and I have the entire hearing broken down in each of its parts, where they cover technology, the suppression, how it's being suppressed, how everything's being suppressed, how the media is controlling everything. The media mocked everyone there, even the former people who served our country and the congressmen and women that were there. They mocked all of them. And it's just crazy. It made history. I say
who mocked?
The media. They wrote an article, like various media sources wrote articles on attacking pretty much all the people who were at the hearing. And all of these people were very intelligent, very smart, care about what's going on, care about us and the state of the world. And they were being provided evidence by the other people and researchers at the hearing, which is very compelling. You can also Google it, Citizen Hearing 2013 UFO Disclosure Hearing. You can find it that way.
So I have two thoughts on this subject.
Sure.
One is I was wondering why we aren't nuking each other yet. No, nobody wants nukes to happen, but I do think it's such a high probability of that happening that we're so irresponsible. We're just these monkeys, basically. And like you said, kids with matches. I'm always wondering, like, and then so I thought, what we were talking about yesterday, multiple universes thing. In my universe, where I want a great world and I envision a great future and technology helping us and having joyous lives, I envision that in my universe there won't be nukes, because we just won't set them off. We'll be interested in the joys and the pleasures that we get.
You don't know
from
how
all these things.
You don't know how on point you are. Continue. Keep going. Because there's
Okay, so that's one theory I have is like maybe it's just my universe but I don't buy into multiple universes theory yet. I'm just not convinced. I think that it's a kind of thing you can say about anything. If you can't explain something, that maybe there's infinite versions of it, and that. But the second thing is, I think the UFO thing. Number one, I don't have to believe the UFO thing at all,
nope.
and I'm not saying I don't believe it. It kind of it resonates with me. I think that it's probably true. All the stuff that you're saying that you
Mm-hmm.
just said, it's probably true. But I would say that anybody that wants to get to my level of understanding, where at least you understand that the spirit lives outside of the body, that fundamental base.
I think it's
All you
important
have to do.
first. Yeah.
What'd you say?
No, I think where you're going, that's important. NDEs and
Oh
starting
yeah,
off there. Yeah.
oh yeah. Near-death experience is
The
near-death
best way.
experience. Watching that is how you get here, and that is the best way because it's firsthand recounts that you will see from other human beings explaining it with honesty and genuineness, and they seem like higher level human beings when they're explaining it. They have perfect memory of it. They're just it's so compelling. That's how you get to this level of understanding. When you talk about NDEs, you can't get. I mean, I'm sorry. When you talk about aliens and crafts and UFOs that we're finally figuring out are real, you can't get to that level of understanding because you can't believe anything that you hear. At least at 39 years old, I've come to realize I can't believe anything that the press says or anything that's being leaked or anything because it has all been fabricated so much in the
Yeah.
past
And they
that
don't talk about it in school. They don't. So whenever they don't talk about it in school, they don't really bring it up in the media. Then you hear about it. How can you take it seriously? You can't because
well,
it's just,
even now, even when they're saying like, oh, all this stuff is real now, I don't even believe that.
yeah.
Like they lied so much about it not being real, and now they're lying so much. They could be lying about it being real.
Yeah.
It's just I don't believe. But the only thing I believe is the kind of stuff I can get from firsthand
Yep.
recounts directly. So so the multiple universes thing. So you wanted to comment on that, like
Yeah.
maybe why
Yeah. So this is
I
something
don't.
that Bashar brought up, and he explains that you can't imagine non-existence. So think anything you can conceive of, think of, imagine exists in some shape or form in some way. So try to think of
Yeah.
non-existence. Try it. Describe it to me.
It scares me. I used to have this experience when I was driving the car as a young kid, looking out over the side. I remember vividly trying to imagine what death would be like. Honestly, I've this has been the scariest imagination I've ever had of like truly believing that there's nothing after death. And that it actually sends me into a downward spiral of feeling like I'm falling just to try to believe that there could be no awareness, that my
Oh,
awareness, that it feels like a falling, like it's like a disaster when I think I get into this loop and I've actually got into that loop so many times in my life, and I'm just realizing now, just for a moment, that I don't need to get into that loop anymore. That I finally now understand that awareness doesn't stop at death.
yeah.
But man, what a crazy. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but you can't imagine non-existence. And also, I want to say that wouldn't it be boring if the universe was finite? Imagine, especially as an eternal being. So eventually, you would get to this wall where you're like, okay, I guess I experienced everything. That's it. But if you have multiple universes, it goes on and on. A choice where you turn left and what that universe looks like if Kevin turned left instead of right. A universe where you're another being on another planet experiencing something and further developing your own awareness as a being. That sounds more intriguing to me. But he goes on to explain that there are parallel realities, and he himself is from a parallel reality that got split off from us, and they're reaching back out to. You kind of have to do. I know this is out there. You kind of have to like do the research and like listen to them yourself, and um, but I'm just sharing what I've learned over the years and how it all ties in. And there are parallel realities. Sorry?
I think that the parallel realities in the multiple universes is also intriguing,
Yeah.
but I just don't see evidence
Think about the
of
Mandela effect. That's a very interesting
what
concept.
about
So the
like a butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the world.
no, you never heard of the Mandela effect?
Oh no, I've definitely heard of it. I
No.
just can't remember which one it is.
So, okay. So this is gonna blow your mind. So the Mandela effect is, and like they named it after Nelson Mandela because apparently a lot of people remember him dying in prison, like I think in the 80s or something like that. A lot of people remember seeing him on TV, dying in prison, and that apparently in our reality never happened. He actually like died in his home and he was fine. But there were a lot of weird little things that large groups of people remember. For example, and you have to look this up afterwards because it's crazy. There's some of them that you might know and you're like, wait a minute, what? Pikachu. I remember.
You told me.
Yeah, Pikachu. I remember Pikachu having a black stripe, and I don't know whoever's watching this, anybody remembers this? Pikachu having a black stripe, kind of like how he has on his ears, on his tail. But if you look back in history and look back when Pikachu was first created, that never happened. But yet a lot of people remember it, and that's weird. So there's.
And I've never even seen Pikachu because I
Yeah.
just don't like
Okay,
Pikachu.
let me ask you a question. You know Cinderella? Have you seen Cinderella?
Cinderella, yeah.
Okay. Mirror, mirror on the wall or magic mirror on the wall?
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
You're in my group.
That's what
That's not what she said. If you go back,
she said. Mirror.
if you go back into our history, if you actually look it up right now, she says magic mirror on the wall. But a lot of us remember mirror, mirror on the wall. And it's just like this weird, there are a lot of experiences like that. And there's actually a giant list of them that break down like all these, like, it's like a break in reality or something where large
I don't know
groups
if that points to a break in reality. I don't see the evidence of that being a break in reality other than just a lot of people having group think, which happens all the time. Group think is horrible. People
it's
believe what other
interesting.
people know.
Well,
You know, the game phone. The story gets warped and then it's warped forever.
to better explain it, Bashar goes into this by explaining how we're shifting through realities billions of times per second, that each frame in reality is like a static frame, kind of like on a film strip. And if you look at that film strip, you can see the image of like a person, a thing, but it's static, it's not moving. But as you shift, you have the illusion of fluidity, kind of like me waving my hand in front of my face, or kind of actually looking at an actual film strip. You know that if you look at a film strip, that's not the entirety of the movie. You can't see a movie by just looking at the film strip. You have to put it through a machine that starts playing those strips fast enough so that it looks like a moving image. And he says we do that so naturally, billions of times per second through energy. Remember, we're all energy vibrating, that we create this illusion that we call reality. Sorry, go ahead.
I still agree with the person that I've watched a lot of theories on the multiple realities, and I still agree with the conclusion that if that is the case, it's really hard to wrap your mind around. It's even more hard to wrap your mind around than the spiritual world that's evident through NDEs. And you know, for me and for most people watching or the average person, they're never going to get to the multiple reality thing. That is mind blowing because it's so mind blowing. Again, we can't even understand the concept of infinity.
Yeah.
Or or timelessness. So we're stuck at ground zero.
And you said it right there. Remember, infinity. So there's no limitation to infinity.
Yeah, and consciousness does seem infinite, and it does. And my feeling that I'm going to live forever, that I've always had, and I've always trusted it, that has now been shown true from near-death experiences and what happens after. That alone, shows me that there's infinite possibility.
So much more.
Way.
Yeah.
If I'm living forever, then yeah, obviously there's infinite possibility. Forever kind of means infinite, but it doesn't. It's very hard for me to look out and think there's a slightly different modified version of the world where I made a slightly different decision and things are a lot different. And to imagine all the slices of all the different worlds, that just, it's a non-starter. You can't go anywhere after that. It's like what can you say about reality if there's a different version of reality for every single different thing that could have happened out there already? You can't say anything about reality.
I think that's
All you
exactly
can
why
say,
we have.
everything,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
all you can say is that everything exists, and but what does that tell you about this place that we're in? Very little
I
is all I'm
think
saying.
I think the reason that what helps is that we're having this type of experience to separate us from all of that so that we can be focused on this experience and not really worry about the other realities until we come to that awareness level. Because right now, with our level of development, we can't really do anything with that, even if we're true, right? So by us being focused, or our consciousness focusing into this, dialing into this physical body where we're in this reality, that doesn't really seem like real. We don't have to worry about that. Even if it is real, we're not even worrying about. Does that make sense? Kind of like you can't perceive it. I can't perceive it. I can only have the understanding or awareness from research about it. But by us dialing into this reality, we can fully like focus here. You know what I mean? Like we're focused here
Yes.
regardless. And if we're given that understanding afterwards, then we're like, oh, okay, yeah. And that makes sense. And then you can dial yourself into wherever you choose after that.
Yeah. No. And you're feel free to keep, adopting that philosophy, but I will not get there. And now there's even more reasons. Like the first reason is that it doesn't, nothing in NDE points to that needs to be the case from what I've seen. That it doesn't seem like there needs to be infinite versions of reality. I haven't seen the need for that anywhere. So why even postulate it? Yeah, sure, it's possible, especially if infinity is what we're talking about. Of course, anything is possible in the realm of infinity. Anything. And so it could be vast. It could be, but what NDE is showing us is not necessarily infinite worlds. At least from what I've seen, it's just showing us Earth versus the spiritual world where we all come from. The relationship between the two, and that is the only thing that I am even concerned with trying to understand and grasp and get my mind around. Like, I'm not concerned with something that exists way out there that has no connection to me at all, even though I don't doubt that there are infinite possibilities out there.
I get what you're
But
saying.
it doesn't provide a benefit for me to believe in multiple worlds.
There are some near-death experiences. These are like my favorite ones, besides like doctors having a near-death experience, or like, scientists having a near-death experience. My other favorite is whenever someone ends up asking the question about life on other planets or other worlds, and then they're given that answer that there are other worlds, there are other beings, and there are all other places out there that we can't even conceive of. But again, we still have to we have to right now, like what's apparent to us is this reality, this whatever we're perceiving right here, right now. That's another thing that near-death experiencers say, that everything, they're given the awareness that everything is right here, right now. And to be more present in our lives, be in the present. That's something we didn't talk about.
Yeah,
Being
exactly. I've heard that. Yeah. There is some, and Rupert Spira says that so well. He's like, think about what the past actually is, and have you ever experienced something from the past directly? Yeah. And then people will think about it for a while, and they're like, no. And like, the only thing you ever experience, exact this moment. That's the only thing that ever exists, is this moment.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something about that that's true. Of course, the time is it's obvious what it is, that there's a trace of what has happened in this shared world. In fact, now that we have more clarity on this shared world and what it is, if it is all mental or if it is all physical, I don't know if it matters. But the shared world that we're all living in, that has develop science and physicalness and materialism. That shared world is well, actually I don't really remember where I was going with that. What were you just saying before that?
I was talking about the multiple realities and being present, and I was also going to tap in. You said something that made me think of it a different way of saying this. So you know how they were talking about how near-death experiences talk about how everything is happening all at once?
Oh,
What?
windstorm over.
Oh,
Got a windstorm over. It's exciting. Yeah, everything happening all at once. Yeah.
That so that would mean the present, the future,
Yes.
and the past is all happening simultaneously.
Oh, I got it. I remember now. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I
but I
got
was
my
just
thing.
going to say that if that's happening simultaneously and all those moments exist, then that means you and me, like in our first podcast, is happening right now because it exists in that moment. It still exists. It's still happening. It's still going on, even though those versions of us can't perceive us having this conversation right now in podcast episode 2, if that's an easier way of elaborating what I'm trying to convey. But it's
Oh,
a
for you.
mind-boggling it's a mind-boggling thing.
It is. Yeah. I had a kind of a cool point,
Sure,
which is that
go ahead.
physical that we share that we share is where we get our concept of time from. And that's evident in NDEs as well. That this physical world brings with it time. And the point of that time could be just to organize consistency. I thought about this the other day, Christian, and I thought, oh, what if this is all about this physical world we live in that seems physical but maybe is not? What if it is about consistency and reliability of mentation? That consciousness is like what we have. It's actually kind of unpredictable. It's like boom, a thought's there. Oh, I love this thought. And boom, an emotion comes. I'm so wrapped up in the emotion. I love it. But the physical world is not like that. This physical world we all live in is very consistent. Laws of physics apply, and emotions are often taught. Like, forget emotions if you're a physicist or you're a programmer. Just logic. And forget emotions, because the emotions aren't the important thing. It's the consistency and the consistency over time, and
Do you mean
the time.
Do you mean consistency in terms of like what's facilitating the experience, or like what do you mean?
No, I mean the objects that are here and our manipulation of the objects. That consistency over time is what is powerful. When you build up your career over time,
Oh, I see what you
it
mean.
takes a long time. And if you're building a building, it takes a long time. It's consistent. And by the way, you can't just make a building or make your career awesome because you feel so awesome and magical inside, which is what we all start with, the magic feeling of like, I'm going to be amazing one day. But then the reality is that it takes so long to build it one tiny bit at a time. My point is, what if this entire physical world is actually a way for mentation ideas to become stretched out and figure out which ones are reliable over time, which things can build given consistency and reliability. In other words, the mental world where we all come from is not reliable. It's firing all these ideas all over the place, but this physical world is like a reliable testing grounds of
So
like stretching out ideas over time. And which ones, and one more thing, which ideas survive over time is the ones that we all adopt. Think about it. If a guy in his basement's like, I know the meaning of the universe because he just got a feeling, we don't care. I don't care what you think. It's the ones that have been tested over time, and there's this time testedness that we all abide by, which is my point. Is this world we live in is kind of like a stage for which things survive over time, possibly.
As I understand it, um, from you have to start looking into past life regression and also hypnotherapy, which I know you'll like it because when you start going into it, it's going to tie into the near death experience stuff and what they share. But as I understand it, especially reading the Your Soul's Plan books by Robert Schwartz, he goes over what the spirit world is like and that we can actually experience things in a physical like way. There are communities, there are buildings even, and
Yeah.
that can be created in a very physical way like we do experience it here. But because time doesn't exist, you can manifest it instantaneously. Because we're in this particular dimension where things, like you were saying, are kind of stretched out, it's experienced in a different way. But at the same time, when we look at the double slit experiment, it shows us that matter seems to change, or what we call matter seems to change based on the consciousness observing it. So, which is very strange. So it's like if you look away from it. Well,
Just to remind you,
sorry, go ahead.
not very rapid. Oh, there's a lot of delay. Not very rapidly. I gotta say, not yes, the particles can change from position to position we're discovering, but on the whole, objects behave very reliably according to the laws of physics on the whole.
Well,
which is unlike what the mind does, unlike mentation, which is swayed by its emotions constantly. The physical world is not it. This world we live in, it's very consistent. It resides through emotion. Right?
I kind of get what you're saying, but then also what I was going towards is that the energy, when it's perceived, it comes out as that consistency that you're describing. But when it is not being perceived, it is a wave of potential energy. So what we consider solid isn't actually solid until there's a conscious observer. Yet we have a lot of consciousnesses or people all around consciously looking at the world. So we perceive solid and we perceive consistency while it's being observed. But when we look away, it's a wave of potential energy. And that's what I was going with that. With the
Yeah, that's what they say. But I'm like starting to think that mental is like so much more unstable. The mental place that we all come from, our ideas and our emotions and things, it's so much more unstable than this physical world that seems physical. And
stable in what way? Oh, and also just a timer. I got 25 minutes. And then we're going to hit that 2-hour mark just to come to a close.
That sounds pretty good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I was going to ask either we take a few minute break and keep going, or we'll just keep going for another 15 minutes or something.
Yeah, because we got so into it. We were supposed to pause, but yeah. But still, it was just a good conversation,
I know. I feel like I'm actually onto something here, and I want to get deeper because this is for real. I've had this sort of as kind of a dawning.
But explain to me.
Just look at the difference between this physical world, which could be mental, where objects are so consistent and they persist over time. 100 years is how long average human lives, and the objects that are around them persist like solid. They're just so solid. A rock is in the same place for our entire life, as a human here.
I get what you're saying, I think. That's actually one of my questions. You asked one of the questions I still have.
Our conscious being, our soul, and everything that we are is so erratic. It's just shooting everywhere. We've got emotions coming in, instincts, and all this stuff. And these physical objects are so solid. What mind is that solid that even if you believe you can fly, I don't recommend jumping off the building to try to fly. It's probably not going to happen. There are some arguments like, oh, if I really truly believe, then maybe I could do it. But there's an overwhelming fact that you cannot change this consistent physical world with just your hope in your mind. You can't change it to anything. And like you said earlier in the NDE, this is a heavy world. It's weighed down. It's weighed down.
So
Why? What's the purpose of it being weighed down? I'm starting to think it's a balancing factor for the unstableness of mental energy that is all over the place.
what do you mean by unstable though? Like like
We
the
were
spirit
just,
realm being unstable?
yeah, we were up in the spirit realm and we weren't here on Earth, and we would just be uh, okay. There would be no such. And by the way, part of what I want to get into is why we all have trouble with patience. Like starting a career is a perfect example. I've had experience of starting my career over 20 years, and it takes so freaking long just to make every little step, and there's so much that has to be done. But as a pure soul, I want it to be done right away. Why can't it be done right away?
I think that's also part of the lesson, and also because we're used to coming from a place where consciousness is the leader, and we can actually perceive. So if you actually look at read the book Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Plan books, or you look at that movie Life After Life, Robert Schwartz explains this, and he says that you can actually perceive, if you want to be a cabin in the woods in that surrounded by a river, it manifests and creates itself around yourself. But eventually a soul sometimes gets bored, and because you can imagine having that at your fingertips, that you can do that at all the time. You would become stagnant because you're not changing, you're not growing. So we come down here and we forget that we can do all of those things, and we have to go into a place in a dimension where you actually have to, again, like, take time to do things. It takes time to grow. It takes time to go to work. It takes time to do all these things. But in doing so,
it makes it more boring. It doesn't make it more exciting. It makes it more boring, and it makes us need more patience. If we could just imagine anything we could experience so much more. Why are we waiting?
At the same time, that's also from our level of awareness here in this body. And as, like, for example, you can have that perspective, but there's somebody else who could have a different perspective. And the fact that they can have that perspective, that they may not find it boring, or maybe they even enjoy the human experience, and it's joy enough that someone is not going to be annihilated after death, that they're okay with that. But there are certain lessons, apparently, as I understand it, that can only be learned in this, by experiencing it in this way. That's the only way I can explain it.
If you ask anybody, if they wanted the power to create anything that their mind thinks of in a moment, they would say, yes, I want that. Anybody.
But then at the same time, as a soul, especially if pre-birth planning is true and the soul chooses to come to Earth via reincarnation by choice, you chose to come here for a particular reason.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to get at the reason.
I remember. And I don't remember.
I actually think that the boringness and the amount of patience that is required in
I'm with you, man.
physical
I'm with you.
Is something.
I want that too so much. You don't understand.
I want to shoot electricity out of my arms, just like they do in the movie.
I want to fly. I want to, like, I want to do all of that.
Why can't I have that? If I wanted to really grow as a spirit, why can't I just shoot electricity out of my arms so I can feel what that feels like? That seems like more growth than just waiting 50 years for my career to expand so I can experience something. You know what I'm saying?
That's a big question. And I still don't understand all of it. But at the same time, I recommend all of you, even you, watch Life After Life. Give that a watch, and then see how, like, you'll come up with more questions.
One more idea on that.
Sure.
If this physical world is so consistent, and us as little souls are so inconsistent compared to it, we're firing with ideas. One day we'll feel like something, and then the next day we'll be depressed, but our life path is like this over time. It's real consistent. You need patience to get up the mountain, whatever. That's how life is. But on a daily basis, we're up and down and all over the place exploring ideas. My thought is that this big mental world where we're climbing like this is like when you look at a huge, animal stomping, it moves really slow.
Yeah.
So this physical world that's so consistent and slow is the mind of a larger thing.
Yeah.
It's a mind of something, and we're the individual little souls inside of it going
Yeah.
around doing stuff. But that mind is, it seems consistent, but it changes over time, and it it will actually, yeah,
No,
I'm going, this.
yeah, but just to touch on something that, like, I just recalled, was about patience. And Bashar had explained that patience is actually an illusion, because what happens is that if you are truly present, and if you are truly present and in love with what you're doing and your passions, you're not really worried about all these external having to be there, having to wait for something to come, because you're so focused on what you're doing in presence that it doesn't
Yeah.
bother you. And that's why, like, when you're doing something you're passionate about, or like us having this conversation, 2 hours is just like, oh crap, that was 2 hours. You require less time in which to exist because you're doing something you're passionate about. And he goes on to explain that when you do something you love doing, or you're into that painting, or you're into that program that you're creating, you're into that app that you're making, and 4 hours flies by and it only felt like 30 minutes, he says, you only aged 30 minutes while the rest of the world could have aged 4. And for them, it could have felt like a long time. Kind of like when you're at work and you're dreading it and you're like, oh God, it feels like this is taking forever. You are creating more time in which to exist. Or when you say you have to go about it a certain way, I have to go to college to get this degree, to do this, to get this done. But not necessarily, because there are people who achieve their dreams without doing any of that stuff. And that's what we call the miracle stories and stuff like that. But those people were going into their life with a certain type of passion, and
Yeah.
life synchronistically just started coming to them, and that's where we get into the law of attraction, where things you attract vibrationally. Because as you start being, you start encompassing and being a certain level of awareness, and you start to really embody that, you start attracting everything that you need at the right time. You run into the right person at the right time. Everything is just very synchronous, and everything just happens that much more quickly. And you brought up something during one of our personal talks that, like, wouldn't that make life just like fly by if, like, if you were so in love with life and so in love and so passionate about your life that it just, in an instant, it was over. Another thing to bring up about that is just that the near-death experiencers talk about when they leave the body, they were like, oh my God, that was so quick. That was so fast. But coming back into this reality, you're like, oh my God, 50 years, but the near-death experience in the grand scheme of eternity is an instant. It's so quick. It's so interesting, right?
It absolutely is, and I will echo that. When I was feeling the water and my blood rushed out of my head, I had a moment of just feeling like it was taking eternity just for the water to fill, and that teaches me by itself that in every moment there can be eternity.
Mm-hmm.
That teaches me, and it's solid. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
In every moment, it can just suddenly turn into eternity.
And that reality exists, even though I didn't experience that reality. I haven't personally experienced that slowness of time, even though I've heard that and I believe it exists. You've experienced it. And that realm, that perception that you had is very real. Wouldn't you say? Like, especially since you've experienced it.
Oh yeah, it's very real, and
Yeah.
it's echoed in near death experiences too.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah.
Mind
So
explosion.
a lot of ideas all over the place, and that's great. And I'm glad we got to dive into some of these things. I wonder in the end which ones are the most useful and also the most provable. Like, I would argue that multiple worlds is not very useful and not very provable either. Like,
They are
show me a
getting there.
way.
They are getting there.
Huh?
They are getting there.
Okay.
I'll have to show you some of
But
this stuff
your theory of, or the other person had, but I think you agree that aging depends on how passionate you are in the moment.
Oh yeah.
That that could be proven because you could actually have somebody doing something they love, and you could try to look at their cells, with a microscope before and after, and see if they've aged
Yeah,
as
we were
much.
talking about that. We were talking about how like somebody looks 30 years old, but they're 50 years old. And then you look at some 50-year-olds and you're like, damn, they look like they're 70, you know?
I don't know this.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure you can incorporate nutrition and all those other things into it as well. But yeah, I guess the main focus is just the time.
And for me, when I talk about time, and I also talk about why is this world so, I ask this question all the time, and yes, you have a point. If you're following your passion completely, you're totally in the moment, you're going to experience what you want out of life more probably, just because you're so in tune. But regardless of that, most people, it takes forever for them to build their career or make money or go through life and grow up. And it takes a long time. Sometimes you look back and you're like, well, time flew, but really it's years and years and so many days. And you're building up to something which is something that in the spirit world could be with a finger snap. You could just say, I would like to be whatever, and you could just be that potentially in the spirit world.
So
There's something about this,
there's something else
time and take.
that I don't
Yeah.
fully understand. But even though I've heard from what I've learned is that you can experience the spiritual world in a physical way and sometimes even emanate a physical like body if you want, but you don't have to. You can even experience like eating a bagel if you wanted, but apparently from the spirit world perspective, it's different. It's a different thing. So you don't get that full. I don't know if this is correct or not. This is just me thinking out loud here, but you don't get that full taste of the bagel and the cream cheese and that's something that's the soul yearns to experience, and that's why we create this experience to experience things like that, like getting the taste of that bagel, enjoying that kind of thing, or like. But at the same time, they describe it as if you could experience that, and it's more real than real. So then I get confused. I'm like, if it's more real than real, why would you want to come here to taste a lower density bagel? Like that's my question. I'm like, but
Yeah, no, I love this free flowing. This is where I think we could actually figure out the next step. And by next step, I don't mean a theory. I'm going to make fun of your multiple universes theory.
I'm gonna send you
I don't
stuff
mean
on that.
I don't mean something that's like, oh yeah, that could be the case, so let's talk about it. I mean like, let's explain everything that's going on right now around us and this existence that we're all experiencing as much as we can. Just outside, when we die, what happens with near-death experiences, and like when our blood leaves the head, what happens there when time slows down? Why does it take so long to go through our careers? All this stuff is super relevant to everyone, whether they admit it or not. Dreams, what's going on in dreams? Those are the hot areas. Like you can kind of postulate what's going on with dreams without needing to even care about multiple universes, potentially.
Yeah.
Show me a case where multiple universes is required in order to understand some of this stuff, and I'll start to look at it. But my point is, like, we can figure out the next step. We know that spirits is the basis for this world. Physical world seems so slow and sludgy, and all the NDEs describe it as so weighed down and heavy. And you're just coming to the realization, why do we need to come back here and experience this weighed down heavy? And my theory is the weighed down heavy is actually something that keeps our spirit grounded, because our mental is so unstable and firing all over the place with all these ideas. Imagine if you just, whatever you imagine came true, in an instant. I think that's maybe how it works up there in the spirit world a little bit. But when you watch the movie like The Secret, when it says the law of attraction, it says if you just imagine, if anything you imagine came true, it would be very disastrous, because you'd imagine like an elephant, because you're watching it on TV and boom, there's an elephant in your room and you're like, oh my God, what the hell? So there's something about stableness of this world that we're in, that's more stable than whatever you imagine is just there and comes true. And furthermore, in the spirit world, there seems to be no negativity, at least up in the heavenly realm where most people go. And again, the hellish realm is not really hell. We've discussed that in another thing, so no reason to fear it. But the point is, like, it's mostly happiness. It's like the quintessential descriptions of heaven from religion.
Right.
So if you're in a mostly happy place and anything you can imagine comes true, then what do you get out of going to a place that's also negative and also has evil in it, and you can't imagine whatever you want and get it right away? You have to work for a long time in a physical world in order to get it. You know, that the growth is there. You know, people say the growth, but it's not satisfying to me. It's like, I just want to dig deeper on that.
Yeah,
What?
and we can, and should bring this episode to a close.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the last thing I'll say is in regards to that is that also from my understanding is that the earth specifically is a type of school. That's something that comes up a lot, especially in the Life After Life documentary interview with those mediums, that specifically where we come to learn love, unconditional love, compassion, and things like that, because there are other worlds where they don't have the type of emotions that like human beings seem to embody. And it's a different level of awareness. We can't conceive of it because obviously we're emotional beings, but there are beings that lack the kinds of emotions that we have, or that type of experience, whatever that is. And as we develop, this place is just like a very sought after kind of place to be, to incarnate into, to learn these types of lessons. And that's all I understand when it comes to Earth being a school. Earth school, they call it in the spirit world. And apparently we're getting to a place where once we get to a certain maturity or level up, if you want to call it that, we'll be able to handle becoming more closer to that fifth dimensional conscious reality where everything is non-physical. And you'll start to talk about like quasi-physical beings and stuff, beings who are also physical, but can also be non-physical, that could interact with us, but it could also disappear, and, you know, things like that. And you start going into those realms in quantum physics and reality, which is immense. Now, what I'm trying to ask you to do is very difficult, because now I'm asking you to perceive what would be a like fourth or fifth dimensional reality, which you can't do within a third dimensional reality, because you're of the third, or well, I think we're of the fourth density dimension, because we incorporate time and space, which adds a layer on top of it. So that's that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, just to draw that to a close, and if you have any final things to say.
I just wanted to reflect on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier about Earth being possibly the most dense place, and I don't know how many realms there are.
I'd rather say one of them. At least
Yeah,
it's got to be.
Yeah, very unlikely that it's the most. Like,
Yeah.
it's our ego again. Like,
I mean,
Earth is the most.
I say Earth.
Yeah.
I just mean this reality, because I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure the moon is pretty solid. You know, like.
Well, I was just going to remark. That's why I brought up the reliable thing, because I just wanted to point out the stark difference between the quickness and lightness of our own spirit and how it can change, really change its whole feeling and form and everything in a quick moment, in seconds. But this place we're all in, the physical world, is so grounded, it's so stable through all of our constant spirit changes, emotions, and constant mood changes. The physical world remains grounded. And I'm about to play Flight Simulator after this, which is such a cool game.
Sounds like a reality you're going to.
Yeah, one of the great things about that reality is the it is a virtual reality. It's not real, and the great things about it is it's so stable. Like when I'm flying through the trees, I get to see them passing. If I forget about the trees for a moment, they don't disappear. They're there always. And I just want to, I guess my closing remark is just think about the difference between the stable physical world that we're in and our own mental mind, and how much different they are, where a mind can be saturated in evil thoughts for a moment and go down a well, but the physical world won't go down the same well.
Yeah.
It's stuck and grounded, and even if you imagine horrible things for a moment, you can still look around and everything's pretty much normal again.
Right.
So people that watch NDEs, I want them to think about that once they realize that this could all be mental, actually, that
Right.
everything could be from the spirit. The difference between the states of the spirit versus the grounded material world,
Yeah.
the material.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right.